It's my mother.
I Saw the TV Glow is a film about identity, control, and time. I Saw the TV Glow follows main character Owen. Owen talks to a girl at his school, Maddy. Maddy and Owen's favorite TV show is called The Pink Opaque. Owen is unable to watch the show because of his father. Owen gets tapes from Maddy to watch The Pink Opaque. Owen is entranced by the show. He views the Pink Opaque as his escape or fantasy. He wishes to live in its world. He's not safe where he lives. After 2 or so years, Maddy tries to leave town, away from her father. She asks Owen to come with her so that he can have someone to watch the Pink Opaque with. But in fear, he stays back, as both Maddy and the Pink Opaque leave without a trace of their existence remaining. Owen grows up in his father's house, alone. When he's an adult, he finds a job. Still, he remains awkward, anxious, and unable to properly communicate with anyone. Eventually, Owen finds an advertisement for the Pink Opaque. Owen then finds Maddy before asking her where she went.
I've been there.
Maddy then tells him she can't stay there much longer and urges Owen to come with her, away to the road high school before leaving town together. She leaves, reminding him of what happened while she was gone, the final episode of The Pink Opaque. The final episode shows the antagonist of the show, Mr. Melancholy, take capture of the main characters. He goes on poisoning them, then takes the hearts out of their chests before burying them alive. Owen, not wanting the Pink Opaque to end, desperately attempts to climb into the TV as his father comes into the room, pulling him out. Owen finds Maddy to talk to her again. Maddy tells him of her life since she's been gone.
Maddy. That's not my name.
She then asks him to come with her to the football field so that they can finally leave. She knows they'll die if they stay. Owen goes with Maddy to the field and makes his choice. He never sees her again, an empty grave behind the field. Owen gets a new job, restocking ball pits at an arcade. He works there the rest of his life. He waits for Maddy to return. He rewatches The Pink Opaque.
And it was nothing like I remembered it. The whole thing felt cheesy and cheap, dated, and not scary at all. I just felt embarrassed.
Then the film ends. Maddy is the path to acceptance, the path that is true to Owen and his desires. Together, they had a strong, almost supernatural connection, such as the protagonists in The Pink Opaque. Both characters find themselves idealizing, fantasizing them to be their own identities, a place where they're safe. The Pink Opaque is who Owen's true self is, the skin he's comfortable in. But he doesn't leave. He feels he can't. So he fits the role of the man his father made him to be. Owen isn't safe, so he begins to rot. He lives the only way he tells himself he can. The Pink Opaque deteriorates in his mind to have only become a faded fantasy. He suffocates in his grave. The omnipresent fear of his father lingers forever in his home. Owen continues to rot, too scared to leave the house, too scared to talk to people. Too scared of Maddy, too scared of his identity. Owen knows he's never been safe, and never wants to be. He lives his life in the wrong body, the wrong person. In Hellfire he raced away, unrecognizable to himself. His light fades. Mr. Melancholy is what controls him. His life was taken away. He rots away in the freezer. He doesn't dare climb out of his grave. Nobody knows who he is and nobody cares. He's too scared of the risk. He's too scared of control. So he turns old. His heart's still beating. Lets it rot in the freezer until he can't breathe. He'll seal up his chest. He'll apologize for what he feels. He'll apologize for what he says. He'll apologize for what he is. Maddy knows it isn't too late. Owen sees he's running out of time. Then, the light goes up. A few months ago, I saw the TV glow, and I have some mixed thoughts. Now, before seeing the movie, I had heard bits and pieces of the discourse surrounding the film, stating that it was
one of the biggest gut punch movies of the year.
Visually, one of the most vibrant and flashy movies you'll see all year.
I think it's beautifully abstract in a way that feels soothing, as if it's like soothing this ache that is always looming throughout the film.
It's so viscerally disturbing and uncomfortable.
That sense of longing you can feel in every single shot, every single moment.
I really think it's a special movie.
It's a very special movie.
And I had no reason to believe otherwise, despite hearing some complaints about the movie, such as the main character being played iconically by someone whose society has yet to see play a half-decent role.
Hey, bud. Hey, Pikachu. Pikachu! No.
Hearing of the film's subject matter of things such as with allegories of struggles with identity and gender, giving me the validation I've yet to offer to myself, and also with it being a semi-well-received A24 horror flick, I ended up being pretty excited to see what was in the movie. And after watching I Saw the TV Glow, I can, unfortunately, say that I believe I Saw the TV Glow has a great amount of missed potential. The film's main flaws stem from a general amount of sloppiness in basically every aspect of it. The movie in general. The acting, for example, is god-awful. As subtly alluded to earlier, Justice Smith is the main actor of the film, playing as the character Owen from approximately the ages of 12 to 55, with likely the worst old person makeup of the past 10 years.
I never got to tell you I'm sorry.
In typical Justice Smith fashion, he brings out a pretty awful performance. Throughout the movie, Justice Smith and basically every other member of the cast have a pretty undefined and inconsistent acting performance, to say the least. Most of the cast suffers from a lot of overacting and or basically seeming like doing the bare minimum to shove down your throat what emotion a character is going through, with the writing and direction at most points really not helping to elevate anyone's performances.
And then surprise, surprise, 11th grade comes around and suddenly it's been her lifelong dream to join the cheer squad.
Due to all of these factors, the film is usually at its worst just when characters are literally just speaking or interacting at all with each other.
He's always messing with time and reality. He wants to rule the world, to trap Isabel and Tara in the Midnight Realm.
Because they're part of the Pink Opaque.
No, because they are the Pink Opaque.
This usually results in the best scenes actually just being where nobody's actually talking, but here, even if it's still pretty bad and obviously is lowering the quality and immersion of the movie, for me at least, it honestly isn't that huge of a deal, and as weird as that is to say in a film as serious as this, due to the unconventionalisms and tone of the movie, it at most points is able to get away with it. I Saw the TV Glow's main structure is going through the life of the characters Owen and Maddy's life in a dreamlike perspective as to reflect on its themes tonally. So I Saw the TV Glow, as has been, again, subtly alluded to, is surrounded around the identity struggles found in main character Owen's life. So the setting of the plot begins at around the age of 12, 4 of when his fantasies begin, with the other segments of the film being the major parts of his life that pertain to his struggles for identity. Until the end of the film, when he's old, depressed, and where it's inferred that his dreams essentially die. So even though Justice Smith and Jack Haven, who plays Maddie, being both about 30, basically just still play as the characters throughout their entire life, passing off these 30-year-olds as middle schoolers, and oh my god, it does not work at all.
Mama, you made it.
There's my favorite 14-year-old son.
Oh, no, come on now, not in front of the fellas.
The only exception to this is for the first 20 minutes of the movie, where alleged 93-year-old man Ian Foreman plays his 12-year-old Owen, and yet it still seems that not a single role can read this dialogue as if they weren't an alien who came from another planet attempting to act human. However, for the most rest of the movie, both main characters basically just play caricatures with consistent traits, just changing slightly depending on their age. Obviously, on the case-by-case basis of actors, there's a wide range of talents and specific traits to actors. As acting goes, unless it's specifically a rare exception with a super emotional, dramatic, intense film, a lot of the performances are purely dependent on the writing, directing, and portrayal of the scenes. Because of this, I believe is why the acting in this film fails to have any sort of impact or complexity for the most part, even if it does seem as if it comes from a very genuine place, as the subject matter is very serious and a complex topic of discussion. And the actors, and especially the director, Jane Schoenbrunn, seem to either have a personal connection with these struggles or wanting to do their best with respecting it. And occasionally, especially with Jack Haven, this ends up showing through with the performances and writing and ends up delivering worthwhile, memorable scenes. And I do very much appreciate the intentions of the entire cast and crew, as sexuality and identity is also something that I've had to struggle with for the majority of my life. But unfortunately, the movie feels at least a bit confused in what film it is attempting to be at points. With I Saw the TV Glow, there's a very unique set of circumstances, as first, the majority of the film and how its story is told isn't supposed to be taken literal, as the majority of the experience of the film is supposed to be atmospheric and purely feeling-based, to the point where it can eventually become somewhat detrimental. Such as, for example, when later into the movie, after Maddie, who is the main driving force of the plot, disappears without a trace for almost a decade, permanently altering Owen's life and their dynamic, then there's this big moment in the story where she comes back out of nowhere.
You remember me?
So when Owen and Maddie head to a bar to finally discuss what has happened for the past almost decade, big moment, they cut to an over 2-minute long, unrelated stage performance of indie artist Sloppy Jane and Phoebe Bridgers performing a musical number before non-consequently cutting back to the main characters going back to having normal conversation. And why? And then while they're having this super serious conversation, they play the rest of the stage performance in the background, and they cannot stop interrupting the conversation of the beginning of the emotional climax of the film for this stage performance. And even right after the conversation finishes, they perform a second stage performance of an entirely other song with Christina from indie band King Woman. And with other examples like this throughout the movie, such as the constant referential callbacks and the randomly unnecessarily prolonged scenes, oh my god, the randomly unnecessarily prolonged scenes. Throughout the movie, there's just constant uses of trying to do mood settings and long show-offy music video segments that usually just do not add to the film in any way at all. Like this montage scene of Owen walking through the hallways for several minutes to demonstrate the words of "Owen watches the Pink Opaque," which is also explained in the before and after exposition dumps that Justice Smith says directly to the camera. or more frequently, the feelingly spliced in tone-setting shots of imagery from Owen's fantasies and the Pink Opaque. And despite maybe feeling a bit nitpicky, it really does feel as all of this adds up to a much larger issue of, for me at least, making the film in most of its entirety feel disjointed and sloppily put together. As, again, for having all of these patterns and scenes that needlessly extend the film's run length in a movie where it specifically kind of needs it to flow well to reasonably convey the information and emotion needed, whilst it still also contains multiple different extremely lazy exposition dumps, seemingly to make up for time. From the narrator's scenes of Justice Smith directly explaining things to the camera, rather than finding unique or just plain better flowing ways to introduce certain set pieces or major plot points into the story. And from all of the segments of the film that are smushed into it that seemingly add nothing as a whole for parts of an aesthetic, makes me wonder occasionally if the film is more concerned about having this complex discussion about identity or wants to be a 90-minute long music video. Now, in this film's defense, its style is pretty great with plenty of visually breathtaking sequences and shots, but it feels as if sometimes these stylistic showcases only work in isolation. All of the film's focus on this aspect really only adds up to a feel, and the experience of the movie for the most part hinges on if you specifically as a viewer can immerse yourself into it rather than in a certain way view through a more objective or critical lens. As the experience of the movie is basically a collage of differing visions and imagery with similar theming all smashed together in service of the feel that's put onto a movie that from a technical and writing standpoint is either below average or just average in most aspects. Generally, the screenplay structure of events by itself is something I'm a lot more appreciative of. Obviously, the perspective of telling a film story through the life of a character with a specific focused part of their life isn't particularly a unique story structure at this point, but what makes I Saw the TV Glow's use of that storytelling device so interesting is by using it from mostly a metaphysical, queer viewpoint. Films surrounding topics of gender or sexuality in general film culture, whilst not being unheard of until somewhat recently hasn't been explored at really any sort of length within many films or stories, specifically not within the mainstream media. So, despite how remarkable it is for this, as an idea to be fully explored, distributed by a major studio, and to be at least somewhat recognized, the concept of using the lens of a classic formula through an exploration of identity gives it, despite all of its flaws, to be a wholly original work of art, whilst having many general uses of genuine, fresh concepts. Even though I'm not much a fan of what's actually within a lot of scenes,
What the heck?
a lot of the concepts of what they consist of or revolve around are genuinely pretty investing. For instance, one of my personal favorite parts of the movie, the Pink Opaque. The Pink Opaque, as for being a major part of the theming and of Owen's and Maddy's story, it's shown several times throughout the movie, usually through brief glimpses more focused on the characters' reactions and connections to the show rather than the show itself. As could be figured, the style and format within the Pink Opaque as depicted is very much a homage to the late 70s to early 90s era of television series within a format of metacontextual nostalgia. And despite most rest of the movie being showered in not so subtle referential pieces of that era of nostalgia, I think the format of the Pink Opaque is actually decently well done. And one of the main things that I like about these scenes is how, as well as the style was actually contained in it, is given opportunities to have actual depth and nuance to be explored by what's happening in the show, semi-obviously being paralleled to Owen and Maddy's storylines.
You're like me. You're special. We are the Pink Opaque. It's our destiny.
I don't even have my learner's permit yet.
How can I have a destiny?
The Pink Opaque is also semi-obviously not a fully real show in the universe of the movie. It is more implied to be basically this basis of a TV show that's morphed into what it is shown as based off of the character's perception of it, and the wonder and fantasies they have surrounding the show's world. This is also the reasoning as to why Owen's referred to as Isabelle, the protagonist of the Pink Opaque, by Maddie, or why he's shown to think that a lot of what is happening in the show is happening in real life, as his perception of the show and what's inhabited within it is basically just to correspond it to Owen and how he perceives his life and the horrors that go on within it, usually depicted in the Pink Opaque as to how he feels on an emotional level throughout, as the Pink Opaque is shown to be one of, if not the only constants and comforts in his life, and his output to actually express himself. The approach of using the Pink Opaque as a viewpoint to see parts of the story unfold, as well as Owen's mental state being revealed, is genuinely a pretty creative and engaging way to relay portions of the film in a unique way without exposition dumps. This is an example of an actual way that I Saw the TV Glow showcases just generally good writing and actually uses it to convey information and help improve the film's theming and emotional core. But then, for whatever reason, I Saw the TV Glow flicks their noggin upon the usage of their pointer finger, and the genius that ends up falling upon their lap is to put narrator exposition dumps over the entire scene just explaining what's happening.
She sent me one more tape in the mail.
Mr. Melancholy is coming.
Isabelle follows the sound of Tara's voice. She finds her at the dock by the lake. But then, as Isabelle approaches, she picks something up. Stray signal from the psychic plane.
Help me.
She's buried underground. Mr. Melancholy had got to her first. They cut out her heart. And then he makes his entrance. Mr. Melancholy. The big bad.
Now, as stated before, for whatever time or expense reasons, there are several scenes of Justice Smith Owen narrating plot points throughout the movie, usually to convey things that are happening without having to go through the motions of actually showing what happened, so that the movie can get on to the next plot point, or occasionally to just explain what's happening, or regurgitating what already happened in case someone watching the movie had taken 3 phone calls and an afternoon nap while the movie was playing, I guess. And obviously, a narrator in a movie as a concept is absolutely not a negative, and can very much be used to a film's benefit if done right, even specifically with first-person narrators as I Saw the TV Glow does, where in the right hands it can open up lots of opportunity for humor or self-reflection from a character, or, just an interesting perspective to have a narrative unfold that you couldn't get in a story without a narrator. But in I Saw the TV Glow, I don't really understand what they were even going for artistically by having narration throughout, and for the most part, why? In most scenes that the movie decides to take you out of the perspective of the rest of the film to have Owen narrate and or speak directly to the camera, it doesn't appear as if there's any rhyme or reason as to why as a creative decision it's there. Rarely any new information is conveyed or that couldn't have been figured out to be reworked into the story likely to the film's benefit. The most understandable scene it's used for me is in the ending monologue where it's showing Owen after the events of the climax and what follows through Owen's perspective, whilst going more and more into denial and eventually to segue into the final scene with pretty efficient setup. And if I'm gonna be honest, this scene in its entirety is actually overall pretty great and has genuinely gotten me semi-emotional seeing the delusion in Owen's character and the understandable lack of hope for the future. But even if this seems a bit pessimistic, considering how overall I believe the scene is good and overall adds to the movie, I think it honestly could be significantly better. For the exchange of the emotional impact of the scene, for example, in a first watch, with the flat, straightforward exposition of the film's themes not really portrayed relevant to the other segments of the movie, having it, for me at least, end up ruining a lot of the interpretable subtlety of the rest of the film, and a lot of interpretable aspects of what the themes of the film mean by practically just spelling out or repeating previously shown metaphors or sequences.
Found myself wondering, what if she was right? What if she had been telling the truth? What if I really was someone else? Someone beautiful and powerful? Someone buried alive and suffocating to death? Very far away on the other side of a television screen. But I know that's not true. That's just fantasy. Kid stuff.
Ruining subtlety whilst also removing a layer of the film's unconventionality to straight up tell the audience things that could have easily been interpreted from earlier segments that were constructed in a specific way to be interpretable, and just straight up spelling out how your main character's feeling makes it mostly pointless to spend much of the movie giving bits and pieces to form the story and its themes around. It's okay to want the film to have its messaging's experience and emotional core to be more accessible for a general audience, but you shouldn't spend most of the movie setting up to basically spell it out at the end. And no, this is not specifically a problem of the final monologue, or even at some point specifically the monologues in general. Overall, this movie unfortunately suffers from this lack of subtlety and nuance. And the amount of time it wastes trying to figure out its vision, in my opinion, ends up making the film begin to feel muddied and reduces impact of even the high points of the movie for me, such as with the final of the Pink Opaque episode. The episode depicts the two main characters of the show, Isabel and Tara, being captured. Then their hearts are cut out and become poisoned before they both get buried alive, ending the episode resulting in honestly a really haunting follow-up of Owen trying to enter the TV in desperation for the Pink Opaque to not disappear from his life, as his father drags him out, then unfortunately physically abuses his son. This is distinctly one of the most emotionally intense and important scenes of the movie, exploring the headspace of Owen and revealing things that have only been alluded to in earlier scenes.
Or do you ever have a hard time distinguishing between what happened in the show and what happened in real life? Well, I'm passing out.
Are you sure it's okay that I sleep down here?
Just be out by dawn. If my stepdad catches you, he'll break my nose again.
So you won't remember anything. Your real name? Your superpowers? Your heart?
Mr. Melancholy is coming.
If we're gonna defeat him this time, we're gonna need to harness the full potential of our shared powers. We're gonna need to meet again. In person.
And ends up revealing the full extent of what Owen's been going through all the years that he's been alone. Both mental and implied physical abuse that he's gone through before and after the Pink Opaque left. But I can't fully connect to it because for whatever reason the movie decides that instead of being subtle or just letting me watch and take what is actually fucking going on, it decides to put Justice Smith describing every single fucking thing that happens during the entire scene in the most somber voice I've ever heard. Then Mr. Melancholy walks in, the big bat. Shut the fuck up. Putting Justice Smith in the background describing what's happening in each and every single part of a crucial, emotionally charged scene whilst rushing through it is not the most engaging and creative way to portray a story. And even if this seems like some sort of straw man or minor criticism, to me, I really can't feel as much as I'm intended to, because even though I see what the vision is, what the idea is, and the emotion, due to these issues distracting me, I feel like I'm more just understanding and appreciating the intent rather than feeling it. As due to how it's portrayed, I'm more inclined to laugh when Justice Smith is speaking sorrowfully going, but then as Isabel approaches, like he's bored and is approximately 3 seconds away from bursting out laughing. Also, I'd like to clarify, this is not a specific one scene issue that doesn't really affect much else in the movie. Even for scenes that don't include like obnoxious narration or 5 minutes of unrelated concert music scenes, as an overall production, really through the whole movie, there's just a general lack of cohesion or consistency in the writing, acting, pacing, and the dialogue. Throughout the rest of the movie, it suffers from these issues repeatedly and many other minor problems throughout. But even with every single one of these issues bringing the film down for me and sometimes even ending up thinking of parts of the movie as embarrassing or even unintentionally funny, I do end up finding myself deeply connected with I Saw the TV Glow nonetheless. When I had first seen I Saw the TV Glow, I really didn't like it. Obviously, I'd noticed and taken issue with a lot of the problems that I've already discussed, but the entire time I was watching it, I was either laughing at it or just felt bored, with the exception of the ending. The ending of I Saw the TV Glow shows 20 years after the events of Owen running away from Maddie in the climax, where he's stuck in a dead-end job, alone and constantly afraid. So in the last scene, it shows him breaking down, screaming for help as everyone in the room goes limp, not looking at him, not saying anything, before he goes to the bathroom and carves open his chest, revealing the Pink Opaque still being within. Before finishing off the movie with him apologizing to everyone he sees for breaking down, as they continue to ignore him and as the sounds of the arcade get louder and louder, beginning to drown out his voice, it ends. When I had first watched this scene, I genuinely was pretty uneasy with Justice Smith's performance in this scene being actually pretty haunting, as well as the dread of this implied perpetual cycle of misery that Owen's trapped within never being safe. So, even though I overall very much disliked the movie, after a few days or so I ended up rewatching it to see how the experience of it is, whilst having complete hindsight of its story and also its flaws. And while watching it again, I did actually begin to feel a lot of the emotions that I thought I should have the first time, and I ended up actually, falling in love with the movie. Despite all of my issues, I began to think in ways it was genuinely beautiful, and understood a lot more of the intentions and purposes behind the movie, and even found myself personally connecting to its subject matter and characters. But generally, just because I find myself connecting to the movie now more than before, obviously it doesn't absolve the movie of any of the issues it may have, since, my subjective thoughts shouldn't really be changing any of the objective measures of a movie that I personally value, even if I'm still obviously allowed to enjoy it and understand what it does right. If a movie still has the big wad written within its script, I don't really think I can personally say with my critical measures that it's a better experience or piece of art than something that I can understand has been slaved over to attempt its best to fully respect the audience and to fully portray the experience that they want to give. But, why do I even like it now rather than the past 82 years where I've been bashing the movie into the ground? Depiction. That's why depiction, around the climax of the movie, there's an over 10-minute long scene where Maddie begins a monologue where she tells the story of when she left town. She tells how she barely scraped by for years, depressed, empty, and despite running away, nothing still feeling right. Worse as the years passed by until one day she pays a guy to bury her alive. As she describes being buried alive, she begins desperately to try and escape, as she slowly dies from suffocation, begging for anyone to hear her pleas for help as a last hope as she begins to fade away. And then finally, as she feels herself leaving her body, she begins to claw her way out of the dirt to search for Owen. And after a long time, when she reaches the surface, she realizes that Owen's been buried too, and ended up coming back to town to save him. As it's understood or not, Maddie's story is very much not literal. Far less literal than the rest of the movie, which technically could be somewhat watched as a straightforward story, but as with the rest of the film, and this scene especially, the nuance and impact comes from what it's actually trying to communicate with the audience, and more the experience of the characters. The story told by Maddie is basically a mental depiction of Owen's life progressing. After Maddie and the Pink Opaque left his life, he'd believed that he'd done what was right by not leaning into what he thought was delusions. But as years passed, despite getting a job and living a somewhat normal life during his adulthood, he felt empty, unable to feel comfortable or even knowing who they are, resulting in him being completely miserable and fearful of practically everything, as Maddie finally comes back. This is my interpretation of the film's way of illustrating the emotional state Owen finds himself in, stemmed from the fear on an almost superstitious level for accepting who he is and the misery that fronts him, as he's found in a constant level of denial and fear from the world he finds himself and puts himself in. This is a clear message of representing the struggles of discovering identity, presenting a cautionary tale through Owen, who is a character, at least in my opinion, that I see as more of a stand-in to delve into the topic of identity, to be more of an audience surrogate for the audience to have more of a perspective understanding of the struggles of going through events similar to Owen, rather than being a fully fleshed out character with a significant amount of depth.
When I think about that stuff, it feels like someone took a shovel and dug out all of my insides, and I know there's nothing in there, but I'm still too nervous to open myself up and check. I know there's something wrong with me. My parents know it too, even if they don't say anything.
This, however, isn't a bad thing at all, as that's not really the film's purpose. It is more based around the depiction found in the subject rather than a connection to the characters. So just from the way the movie shows the experience, results in, despite Owen mostly just being a character written around the theming, resulting in him not being the most in-depth character. Again, there is a genuine connection to be found. A genuine connection to this character felt by many, with different pasts, different personalities, different experiences, and so, again, I end up finding myself deeply connected to Owen's character, and just generally I saw the TV glow. And I believe the reason why is because
at 21, Tammy feels she is free. She feels she can make her own decisions about her life, but can she? As a woman, what can she do with her life?
I wish the ice cream man didn't have to leave when the weather got cold in the winter. I wish he never went away.
Jane Schoenbrunn, the director of I Saw the TV Glow, is trans. Before the writing process of I Saw the TV Glow, Jane had recently came out as non-binary and underwent hormonal replacement therapy. Whilst they were going through this, they had begun writing the screenplay for the film, wanting to include, other than the general difficulties with recognizing identity, to depict a cautionary tale for what would happen to someone who never ended up discovering themselves. Even despite what they describe as an egg cracker, when someone realizes their identity does not correspond to their assigned gender. To act as a form of comfort and safety with a head-on encouragement in a way for those who haven't yet come out, or more generally to those who are afraid and or uncomfortable with their identity or sexuality. To understand themselves in the haunted feeling of not feeling like you're in your own body or even safe in it. As even though Owen never has a good ending or even comes to terms with himself, he'd still be able to after the film's ending. It's just that it wouldn't be inferred to be likely considering what he's convinced himself in the place he's in at the end of the film, as if speaking to the audience that it isn't too late. Since the movie came out, many people who related to the movie or just connected with it have came out and expressed how the film's ways of depiction and head-on theming had better let them come to terms with themselves and, in a way, comfortable with themselves due to how the film portrays the struggles and pain as someone whose experiences are depicted within the film. Besides the parallel between how people connect to I Saw the TV Globe reflecting how the movie depicts the relationship between people and the media that is close to them, the discussion surrounding the film has been quite varied, with despite the majority of people very much enjoying the movie, there was also naturally a minor group of people who ended up disliking the film, which ended up receiving some amounts of backlash by people with differing interpretations of the movie and who connected to it within deeper ways, whether through real-life experiences or inherently being connected to the film's portrayal of queerness. Usually criticizing how specific people interpret the film, usually portraying frustration of certain interpretations of theming or just not fully understanding the movie, resulting in a less than favorable experience with it. Despite there not being any sort of large whiplash or generalized opinions, there's something that happened with this film and many other pieces of media where a general audience ends up deeply connecting with its theming, finding comfort and or safety within it to the point of it becoming deeply personal to the person, and therefore being hurt whether openly or passively and ending up having personal biases against the person or just generally the opinion. Usually this is rooted in a way where a piece of art becomes so close and personal to the person experiencing it that it ends up resulting in a desire for validation to have others experience the art in a similar way they found themselves, and will passionately defend their perspective, as a lot of the time something becomes of the media to the person, something more, where they attach parts of their own identity to the art piece. Where even though this isn't always the case, does a lot of the time subconsciously view the art as a part of themselves, resulting in a belief of the mocking of the work or recognizing parts of it that someone believes is a flaw within something they've idolized and attached themselves to, and sometimes within the connection of the art piece, ends up being delusioned sometimes by putting others or more generally putting themselves in the way of their own enjoyment or connection to the piece of art. To trap yourself within the perspective of what something has to be, what something has to measure up to, ruins the entirety of what makes art so beautiful and why most of it is still being made. Not to be a fundamental to survival or to capitalize on mindless entertainment, it's to have something special. Whatever that is to you, whether it's appreciation of talent, experiencing the beauty, or to just see and feel something real, we all have different views we can have. We all have something special to us in art, whether you know it or not. You can find it somewhere as long as you don't blind yourself with any false belief you get from something. Nobody should be able to make something that means something to you, or makes you feel safe, not mean that to you anymore. Not even yourself. For something to be special, it doesn't have to be perfect or really even great, as long as what you feel is real. Anything can mean whatever it means to you, and you can find issues in basically anything, but depending on what you value and what you see, and what it means to you, the question is, does it really make it any less real to you?
Right now, at this very moment, as you watch these light rays striking the magnified eye, similar tiny beams of light are entering your own eyes. And it's by our eyes that we are able to gain a great part of our knowledge. Nature has located the eye close to the brain so that its messages may arrive there quickly. Nature has also provided ample protection for this very delicate organ.
Aged 18 to 22, the girls are groomed in appearance and manners to bring out the best tradition of the thousands who have belled before them.
If I had my life to live over again right now, if I hadn't married, and I were just getting married today, would I live it the way I'm living it now? Oh boy, I doubt it.
I'd been told by my friends, how it was and what was going to happen. And so I was definitely ready for it. I felt fine, I felt sort of more like a woman, and I don't think I actually derived any great pleasure from the first time I had intercourse. It was more like something to be done. Like, for one thing, I was on my period at the time.
Oh, I'm not even dressed yet. How about my hair? What are you so nervous about? I think he's taking me someplace special.
Antiperspirant secret, made for a woman's extra feelings.
Do you think you'll ever get married to him?
It really depends, because so far I can only judge marriage by my friends and their relationships with their wives or husbands. And it seems to me that the institution of marriage is a farce.
The thing you have to sell them is freedom.
Had green eyes.
Armchair convenience, luxurious styling. A set where the pride of ownership is truly second only to the pleasure.
And so themselves. What has become of the American woman? Where is she in all this? How do we find her? There are no easy villains. There are many victims.
When I found myself locked in this room, I realized I couldn't find a bed to sleep. The only thing left was a window. Looking through, I believed I'd seen the faintest glimmers of these beautiful, colored strobes of light. Days passed, I did nothing but stare at them, entranced. And suddenly, inside the reflections of these windows, I could see that my eyes had begun burning. So in return, my sins had set me ablaze. I never did end up screaming for help, as I knew that's why I ended up here. At least here I know I can be safe. I'm less scared when I know that my suffering is mine to own. It was selfish of me to try to be her when I know I'm not pretty. Since the beginning, I knew that flashing lights were always bound to make me blind. So lights grew until I couldn't look away. Pain wore off till I begged for it to come back. And then finally, my skin began to melt. My broken bones began to wither away. My infirm limbs were torn off of my disgusting body. The skull was then burst open violently. It splattered its black blood all over the walls that contained in it a perpetuum. And I was so beautiful.
Take your clothes off.
You're very pretty.
Thanks.
Sometimes I wish I could be pretty like that.
I wish you were a girl.
Sometimes I think I might have been better at it.